Hi, I'm Lottie.
And I'm Christian.
And we're Circus District.
Your source for online news, classes, and all things circus in Washington, D.C.
Thanks for being here.
Hey everyone, Christian here to provide your most formal introduction to the Circus District YouTube channel. I want to let you know up front that this video may contain coarse language. It also includes discussions about sexuality and gender identity, which I hope will inspire conversations in your own household. We know that the DMV circus community is kind, loving, and respectful, and we wish to keep it that way on our YouTube channel. If you wish to continue with subtitles, please click the CC button on your video screen right now. With that, please enjoy the video. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pride Month interview series for the Circus District. We are so happy to have an extremely talented cast of circus humans joining us for these discussions. This series is meant to highlight the multifaceted LGBTQIA+ community of circus artists in the DMV, and to illustrate that Pride is not a static concept with one set definition. Pride means many different things to many different people, and we're here to celebrate that. To give you some background, if you're just meeting us, Circus District is the online circus community in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. We provide a weekly here and now roundup of virtual and in-person events, and we also publish regular articles on Dispatch, your source for local circus news, academics, book reviews, and more. As you watch these interviews on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, don't forget that we have an actual website, circusdistrict.com, where you can find plenty of local resources and information to help you along on your circus journey. You can also contact us by emailing circusdistrict@gmail.com or messaging us on Facebook or Instagram. Now to introduce myself, my name is Christian Klock. My pronouns are he/him. I started doing circus at age 6 when I learned to juggle and have just been flabbergasted by where juggling has taken me in the world since then. I am one of the co-founders of the Circus District and have been performing and teaching juggling full-time since 2016. And I am celebrating Pride as a gay and queer individual. My guest today is known on stage as Mix HelloKatie and known in this Zoom room as Kai. Kai is an incredible artist on stage and off. They are a kink educator who leads workshops on rope bondage, in addition to performing as a burlesque and flow artist. Kai has also led conversations about how to build better spaces for queer bodies and voices in the rope community. They have sold their visual art in the DMV at venues like Arty Queers, DC's LGBTQ+ art market, and performed at events like Beauty in the Backyard. Kai also appeared in Sunset and Chill's Resist music video, which was produced last summer during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C. I am so excited to hear about all the wonderful things you do. But first, if you would like to introduce yourself, tell us your pronouns, and also where you're from, that would be wonderful.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kai, also known as Mix HelloKatie. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I am a Northern Virginia resident. I live in Falls Church. I've been here the majority of my life, so not DC proper, but like DMV local for sure.
Nice. So for a lot of us, I feel like art is kind of a lifelong thing, just like a lot of these facets of identity are lifelong endeavors and a process. How I know that you're a visual artist. How did you first get into the flow arts?
So I started, so I had seen fire performers like a lot, and both at a regular kink event that I go to that has a camp that has their own like fire team, and I'd seen it a lot there, and then a friend of mine invited me to Sunset and Chill, and at this point I had kind of gotten over my like, oh my god, it's fire, like fear that I had, and I had a friend who had some like LED fans, and I practiced with them for a little bit, and then I was like, can I like light your fans, because this seems really fun, and that's I did the thing. So that was like August of 2018 that I first like lit up. But I had already been doing like burlesque and had kind of been, I started like in theater in high school, and so like performing, and that is not new to me by any means. As you said, like art to me is not new by any means. I was initially, when I went to college, I was a photojournalism major, so Yeah.
Great. Yeah, definitely skills that come in handy when we're building communities like this.
Yeah.
So how did you get into the bondage and rope community? You said that that was a place where you ended up finding actually flow artists.
So that was
How does
actually
that
the first
community?
time I'd been introduced to flow arts too. Yeah. So if we're going like all the way back, I was in a very repressed Catholic marriage and just realized that like I'm too gay for this. And this was not going to work out for me. And kind of went on my journey and ended up talking to some people who told me that I should, if I was interested in kink, that I should join FetLife, which is kind of like the kinky Facebook. And then I found out about this event, and it was a happy hour that no longer exists, but this was back in like 2016. And there was a girl who was tying somebody there, and I was just kind of fascinated. And my friend was like, went right up to her and was like, "Tell me more about this." And she invited us to her house like that weekend, and so I went to a little like class, and I was hooked. I was just like, this is so cool, I want to learn everything about this. And I did. Like I jumped right in. So that was like spring, like February, March of like 2016, when I first started doing rope stuff. And then kind of in my rope journey, I wanted to practice as a top, like I wanted to perfect my skills, but I also found it hard to find other people to tie me. And so I started self tying. And then self tying turned into self suspension. And then self suspension turned into like aerial self suspension performances. So that's the slow evolution of how I am where I am. Yeah.
Nice. And when you hear the word pride, it would be, I guess, so wonderful if like pride could just be packaged in a rainbow colored shirt from Target. But it's actually much more beautiful that pride actually means so many different things. So when you hear that word pride, what does it mean to you, and how has that meaning sort of evolved over time?
So I actually had not attended a pride until like I've identified like in high school I identified as bisexual. Like my junior prom, I took a girl to prom, and then I kind of had some like, maybe this is a phase, maybe we're not actually gay, like married a man and whatever. And then I was like, no, I'm definitely like pan. Like I definitely like like people, like I don't care. And that was a term that was new to me at the time, that, like no one had ever described pansexual to me or what that meant. So I actually didn't attend my first like pride parade or really celebrate pride until I was like well into my, adult years. I think I was like 28 when I first went. But it was really exciting for me. And it was kind of interesting because like by then a lot of my, like queer friends were kind of like over pride. They're kind of like, pride's not cool anymore. Like we don't even go because it's so commercialized. Um, and the last pride that we had in the DC, I had an amazing time. I was spinning with a bunch of friends like on the stage, and we all had like rainbow fans and whatever, and we were doing, we just went and did our flow thing. And I wasn't like scheduled to be with them, but they were basically like, just come, everybody come flow and be gay and it's great. And it was really really awesome. um so I don't know, I mean, it's been kind of complicated. I definitely, I I am proud to be very open about who I am and what I do and things, particularly with like, the type of performances that I do and things like that. I am not ashamed of that anymore. I think I spent so much time like trying to figure out who I was and what that really meant to me, and like whether or not I was queer enough, that like once I was like, yes, I was like, I'm not being quiet about anything anymore. Like I'm just gonna be in everybody's face and I don't care. And if they have a problem, like, screw them. Like I don't care. Um, so I think it's the biggest thing is just that it's really important to me to not be closeted about things anymore, like to be really open about things. And like I know that there are people that don't have that opportunity. And I always, like every year we'll reblog the little turtle that's like the rainbow turtle that's still in its shell. And it's like, it's okay if you're still like in the closet, because I know that some people don't have that ability as far as like being safe and also being out. So, but I think for me personally, it is important and it is a big deal. And I just like to be able to celebrate that. But I also like to like throw in education too, because I think this is a really great opportunity to teach people about like pronouns or gender or like different sexual identities or things like that, because not that it's not ever okay to do those things, but I think like people outside of the world care more right now, so they're interested in educating themselves, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's definitely a recurring theme that if somebody's in maybe like a heterosexual presenting or cis presenting in that type of relationship or presenting that sort of identity, that they often do that calculus of like, am I gay enough? Am I queer enough? Am I whatever the modifier is enough?
Enough.
And so it's a great reminder that we all can be honest about ourselves in whatever measure that we're at, and there's not sort of like a comparison one way or the other. And also what you talked about with coming out, you can come out in such small ways that have such a big impact about any facets of your life. So it's really about just finding ways to be honest in ways that you're comfortable. So that's an excellent reminder. Did you grow up in a space where you felt like you had queer or LGBT role models, or did you feel like it was kind of hard to talk about those subjects growing up?
um so I would say, so I went to a very small high school, and like I said, like I was one of two gay couples that were openly gay, like in our entire high school. So that was obviously kind of a big deal. My friends didn't care. My friends were totally like, whatever, like y'all do you, whatnot. The school was totally fine. They almost were like, even like extra, like, we are very okay with this because that is the right thing to do, like we are totally fine that you guys are here together. And I'm like, all right, school, like whatever, cool, like chill out, it's not a big deal. um but I definitely like my I think, and it's taken me like some time to kind of get like come to this realization and like really think about it, but I think that that idea of like this is a phase was kind of like given to me by my mother, and like that kind of weaseled its way in there, um and kind of made me reevaluate everything like when that relationship ended. um so it's, I don't want to say that I was like, I definitely didn't have it as bad as a lot of people do. Like I was not bullied for being gay. It was just kind of like, it just made me even weirder than I already was. It just like made me even more like in the like eye of like, oh, let's be in this person's business and whatnot. And obviously like going to, not just like, there was only I think like 126 kids in my graduating class, so like everybody knew everyone and everyone's business and like all of the things. So like my relationship to me was just what it was, but like it was a big deal because it was in the public eye type of thing, and it was the only like instance of that. But there was not like, I mean, I don't want to say there wasn't, but like I was not aware of like support groups or like, things like, I feel like we have a lot that's much more present now. I actually had a conversation with, I worked at an I worked at an elementary school for a little bit, um, a couple years ago, and the kids from like the LGBTQ like group at the high school like came to talk to the elementary school kids because they were doing a project on like gay rights, or whatever. And I was just like losing my shit because I was like, I went to this high school. I went to this elementary school. None of this existed when I was a kid. We didn't have that kind of support. We were not, there was not enough of us that were out at the time to have a club, you know. So I'm very happy to see that there is a lot more support now. And again, like I don't want to say it didn't exist when I was a kid, but it just was not quite as prominent.
Great. That is really inspiring to hear that kind of interaction and that sort of,
Right? It
I want
was
to
so
say, intergenerational, like having the high schoolers talk to the elementary schoolers and really just like normalizing the conversation. It's super important.
Yeah, because the kids, so the school has a thing where everyone at the end of all the fifth graders at the end of the year, they have to do like a project that has some sort of like big impact. And they have to come up with some sort of like solution to a certain problem. So like 2 years ago, it was the kids even went to like city hall to talk to them about repealing specifically in our city the anti-trans kids like support because that's part of Virginia law. So they were saying, well, in this city, we don't want to have that. And they even went and like took it to the school board and everything. I'm like, y'all are 10 years old and like doing this, and I don't even know what to do with myself. Like, it was amazing.
So the future is bright. Yeah,
Yes.
I
Oh,
definitely
for
have a
sure,
lot of
for sure.
faith. I have a lot of faith in the youth, despite this difficult world we've put before
Yes,
them.
yes.
Um, so I feel like art in all of this is an interesting player because it's easy to say like, oh, art is my way of like channeling something or presenting my identity or dealing with stuff. And I know personally, juggling from when I was young was a way for me to be confident, stand in front of people, not have to talk like I'm doing now to a camera, and have something kind of as a barrier. And then over time, that kind of melted away, and I realized, oh, the audience seems friendly. I think I want to like have a conversation with them with my juggling and be more engaging and open up a little more. Do you feel like your art, whether it's the visual art or rope or anything that or flow arts, has evolved over time to include a little bit more of your identity?
Um, it's definitely evolved. When I was younger, I was very like, used my art for like channeling my angst type of, like teenager, and I would write like really depressive poems and songs and, things like that. Um, Photography just kind of fell upon me, and um I really enjoyed doing like street photography and like capturing the world around me and that type of thing. um my theater was always an excuse to be somebody else, to be like to take on a persona or a role and like not have to deal with like everything that was me, and all the struggles that I had. And then when I got into like burlesque and like doing rope performances, and then like flow performances, it was always, yeah, it was really an opportunity for me to like be super confident and sexy and like, you know, I uh I enjoy like being in front of an audience, like I'm an exhibitionist. I'm like, hey, everybody look at me. I'm doing cool stuff. Um but then particularly when I started like teaching, um it almost became like I had this like persona that was like this different person when I was on stage versus like who I am as an actual person. Um and like once, going places and people would be like, I know who you are, and I'm like, I don't know who you are, like we've never actually met, like you've seen me on the internet, that's not the same thing. It definitely became, like I said, like more of a persona. And that was actually nice because then I could like be that, crazy whatever person who was like in front of people, and then I had like the other me that was like the real me. um and it almost again became like, like doing theater as a kid, like we're doing this role, and then we have like this other, side of ourselves. And then particularly like once I've gone through quite a gender evolution, but basically it came to a point where, because my persona was mixed HelloKatie and like Katie was my, given name, people just assumed that I wanted to be called Katie all the time. And even when I started going by K versus Katie, people would still call me Katie. And then I was like, this is bothering me. Like, I don't like, this is the, person that I put on, and then this is the me. And I'd have conversations with people about like, I don't even understand how you say that you like feel like more masculine or like non-binary, because I see you as such like this strong like femme force. And I'm like, that's because you see me performing. You are used to seeing me in costume. You're used to seeing me with the makeup and the, all of that. And so like, yeah, a lot of that is very feminine for me, but like it doesn't speak to the me. It speaks to like my almost like a drag, person. Like, this is my drag. This is, who I am. And then like the me doesn't really connect with those type of things. So it's been an interesting evolution of like identity with like stage and performance and stuff like that.
That's interesting. So in some ways, it's like been an outlet to present sort of versions. I want to say versions of yourself, but it's also just yourself because any version of you
Yeah.
is you. But
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
interesting because if people are on stage, as you said, in like theater, they kind of accept that people are going to play different roles, and that's actually a mark of like a good actor or actress. Uh, so it's interesting that sometimes in the real world, you tell people, okay, these are my identities. This is how I identify, and then they go, "Ooh, I'm not sure." And you're like,
I'm just like,
well,
who are
on
you to
stage that was
say?
fine. Why is this any different?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's definitely conversations that I've had, like even with other like LGBTQ people. Like, I've had conversations with gay men that are like not respective of my pronouns or my identity or things like that. And I'm just like, but you're gay. Why are we having this conversation? Like, I should not be having this conversation with you of all people.
Yeah, that is definitely a huge truth, and I think leads well into like the next sort of line of thought I want to go down, which is I know that you lead some conversations in like the bondage and rope community about how to be more inclusive, and outside of that, a lot of people might see, even like with the circus community, a lot of people will see circus and go, "Oh, that's kind of like outside the norm. That's fringe. They're accepting of anyone." And kind of the same with, I think, oftentimes in like the kink or the bondage community, or the flow arts, people might have this outward perspective of like, that's different. And so I bet those people are just like, anyone can come on in. How do you feel? I think let's just focus on the bondage and rope community. How do you feel like they have room to grow in sort of creating more inclusive spaces that are not just subtly inclusive, but also just actively telling people, hey, this is a place for you?
So, I definitely feel like the kink community as a whole does try and be very welcoming. They try. There are definitely people that fail, and there are definitely like groups and parts of it that fail. Um, but it's actually a conversation that I've had with several people somewhat recently, in that people don't want it to be called a community. They want it to be called a scene because they don't feel that it actually is a community. They feel like there is not um, enough, um, you know, enforcement of like getting rid of problematic people, whether we're talking about people that are, racist or transphobic, or we're talking about like sexual predators, people who are still allowed to hold events who, have multiple accusations against them and things along those lines. Um, so, yes, as a general rule, those communities want to be the average person wants to be very open and welcoming, and they want people to feel free to, express themselves in whatever way, that they want. Um, but there's always going to be people that are not on that train. And particularly within the rope community, I have struggled, one, as a self tire, which has absolutely nothing to do with like my identities, but that alone is very unusual. And I still will go to events and have even like the dungeon monitor people like ask me if I need help, or like, I had a guy like very loudly announce that like it looked like I knew what I was doing. um and things along that line. So like that alone is very niche kind of within that community. And like self suspension is still very kind of weird even to them, to a lot of those people. But also, obviously with the, rope is typically a, cis man tying a cis woman, and that is very much like how it is. And like maybe occasionally you'll have like, a dominatrix femme person then tying men, but like it doesn't leave a lot of room for the queer people who are like somewhere in between. um and there has been, more movement within that, and it's been, more and more and more of a thing that it's in your face, that I, don't, I go to events and I don't see all like, white dudes in their 40s who are teaching, which definitely like that has been, the thing. And I've had to have conversations with certain organizations about like the fact that everyone they hire is like white and cis, and that's the discussions that are being had. Like not only are these the people that you're presenting, but like when that person is presenting on submission, they are only presenting it from the position of, I am a, white female and I submit to my white male dom. And like that just is not like at all inclusive of the rest of the community. um so but there are also, you know unlike other events that I go to, everywhere asks for your pronouns. Everywhere asks like what name you want to be called by, and like that name is respected. And nobody asks you like, why is this your name, or like what kind of name is that. Like it's just, this is the name that I'm going by, these are my pronouns, and that is, and like, and it'll be, big and bold on your, badge at the event. So like, yeah, there is some, stuff that is generally nicer than like other locations, but um there's still a lot that needs to be done. The other big thing in the rope community, well, there's two other big things in the rope community, is most of the time when it's presented, it's tiny white females, and you don't see bottoms of any other flavor or variety that are being represented, whether that's people of color or people of different genders. And again, you still have a lot of like the male tops are the ones that are, shown and respected and, whatnot. The other issue is that there's a lot of cultural appropriation, because a lot of this, stems from Japan. And so, people using names and words and terms and things like that that they have absolutely no idea what they mean, and wearing traditional Japanese, regalia and things along that line. So like, yeah, there's still lots of problems in the community. I personally have absolutely like been guilty of like cultural appropriation, and used to be like very gung-ho about talking about, in my opinion, what the difference between like shibari and kimbaku was, and like all of this stuff. And then realized that like that was all just full of shit. Like that was not at all what it really was. And I actually took a class from Midori, who is like literally wrote the first like American English book on bondage. And she and I have had a lot of conversations about how hard it is as a non like cis male to be in the rope world. And how, she even being, I believe she's half Japanese, but she, she has Japanese heritage, and she still like people scoff at her prices, but will pay like twice as much for like a Japanese man to teach them, and things like that. But she had a really, really good class about like the cultural like heritage and history of rope bondage and things like that. And she for years has always just said, I just call it rope. And like, if I say I do rope or rope bondage, people know what I'm talking about. I don't have to call it shibari. I don't have to call it kimbaku. I don't have to like get into all of those things. Um, because I don't really know what those mean. Like, I didn't even know that one was a noun and one was a verb. Like, things along those lines. So that's also something that I've been trying to kind of push with my education, as far as like talking about, like marginalization and like you know problems within the community and that type of deal.
Great. It sounds like a lot of overlapping issues that show up in circus productions, particularly in like corporate circus productions, of typecasting, assuming that if someone looks a certain way, that's the role that they're best for and that they're going to play really well. And one of the things that has come up in the prior interviews that I've done is like, if you are in a community of performers or educators, make sure you're looking out for people who actually could be great for certain roles in
Yeah.
leadership or in teaching or in even being a student. Hey, you would be great learning this skill in this class. Um, so that seems really important in terms of changing things up. With the time that you've had, that all of us have had just, sitting in our virtual boxes, there's obviously been a lot of trauma and difficulty that has gone along with that, but it's also given us a lot of time to think and consider where we want to end up, what world we want to end up coming back to, whatever that means for
Yeah.
anyone. What has that time given you to like sort of think about where you want to head as maybe more in-person events go on, or even virtual events? And also, what does it feel like to be sort of the source of education for perhaps people who are just getting into rope and are you're sort of their entry point to like show them the way?
um so it definitely has given me a lot of time to think. And I also had a recent conversation with somebody who said that he felt like I was constantly like fighting people on the internet. And I was like, well, but community, like I want it to be a community. Like I want these things to matter. I want these conversations to be had. I want us to have a better community. Like, I don't want to, if I go to an event and I'm uncomfortable as a white person, what does that mean for all of the POC people that are there? And all of these things that I'm I would say like I've tried to educate myself to the level that like I'm more in tune and more aware of those things, so that I can recognize them and like have these discussions and things along those lines. Um which does absolutely play a role in like my job as educating people. Like if people are going to be, taking a class from me, then like they're going to hear what I have to say about things, but I also feel it's my responsibility. And that was the conversation that I, had with this guy as well, is that like I feel like, as somebody that is in the public eye, as somebody who is like a community leader who people look to, like people respect what I say, and people listen to what I have to say. And they might not listen to, somebody else who is more marginalized, who is like struggling. And I also like, it is not as traumatic for me to have this conversation it is as it is for them to have this conversation. So, like if I, have a voice and I'm willing to use it and I'm willing to like advocate for these things, I should be doing so. Like I feel that it is my moral obligation to be doing this, to like actively work towards, tearing down white supremacy and like gender roles. Like all of that is just, it's got to go. Like it's just goodbye. Um yeah, I just like, I I've also had conversations with people who are like, well, it's just all so much at once. And it's like, okay, but like all of these people have been suffering for like thousands of years, and so we're not going to let it happen. Like we can't just continue to like have the same, things be the same. And it's absolutely an issue within the flow arts community and within, the circus, performer world and everything like that. Like, um, yeah, it is definitely, an issue. Like I recently went to an event and somebody said some, several like racist things, and some other things that were like not, like kosher for me. I'm like sitting there going, it's 2021. We don't use gay as an insult anymore. What is happening here? And just because of that, I didn't feel comfortable like advocating for my pronouns. Like I was misgendered the entire event. It was also the first event that I had gone and introduced myself as Kai versus K or Katie. And so that was like already kind of a big weight for me. But again, like I'm sitting here going, if I'm uncomfortable to the point that like I don't want to advocate for myself and I'm like this little white person who's like very, passing, like how do the other people who aren't like, don't have that comfort or whatever, that privilege, like how do they feel about this, and like how do we cultivate spaces to where those people do feel like safe to be a part of it.
Yeah. And if you're watching this on Facebook, you may have just come from a thread, such as we were describing, where it just goes on. And oftentimes Facebook just isn't the best place to communicate, but I don't want to use that as an excuse for sometimes the behavior that people elicit, because how you act on Facebook does reflect who you are as a person. But it's a great reminder that if somebody is speaking loudly about something to defend marginalized communities, if you somehow feel challenged by that, try to take a breath, maybe take a walk outside first before commenting back about that situation, just because it might feel challenging, because that's what a lot of these conversations are about, feeling challenged and it feeling difficult, but that's part of change. So I'm gonna switch gears to your visual art, which I feel like it's pretty amazing. How I know you've been doing visual art most of your life, but how in the last year has that been an outlet, or how have you shared it with the world?
So my visual art, I've been getting, so I had kind of been really focusing on my visual art and had kind of like the rope stuff was like there, but I wasn't like doing it as much. So because I do so many things, I kind of go back and forth between like now I'm focusing on this and now I'm focusing on that. But I think the biggest thing for me with visual art is that um painting is very meditative for me. Like it's very very healing, and it means a lot to me to be able to share it with other people. And when I sell a piece and somebody is like really just, you can tell that they're just like really into it and they really want this piece of art, then I feel like this art has a happy home that it gets to go to. And like even though I might be sad to like not ever have that piece in front of me anymore to be able to like look at it, somebody else is enjoying it, and that always is really special to me. um because it's like, a little piece of me is like going with somebody else. I've also been really trying this past year to think about reusing things and like kind of trying to lessen my like footprint as far as like art is concerned. So um I had been to the old creative labs and kind of gotten involved with them and done some stuff with them, but I was selling at the new location, the Phoenix Art Yard. And I was going to their art market, and one of the guys, Michael Metcalf, who is like one of the founders, was talking about how he has all of these canvases from the thrift store and how like that's what he paints on, and that's like, and then he just has all these found objects and like trash things that he like turns into art. And I was like, that's genius. Like why am I gonna go, and the way that he talked about it was like having these constantly going and buying like brand new canvases when there are other canvases that like already exist that people don't want. Why like waste, these other like materials? And even before I had that concept, I had already been like saving my dried paint. And so that has been a continued thing that I like have these little baggies of like dried paint, like one that's in my easel and like one that's in my studio. Um, because otherwise it just goes in the trash. And that's like wasted paint. And that makes me very sad. It's kind of a little bit of like an obsessive thing to where I like don't want to waste any paint. Um, but it has definitely given me especially because I do a lot of abstract stuff, it's giving me a very like literal canvas to like work out my feelings on, to like work through whatever I'm going through, or my, emotions or anything that is like, stressing me out. That's like, again, like my form of meditation. Or if I need to like work something out because I'm really like anxious or upset about something, I can do something like super duper detailed. And then that's where my focus is. And then I am kind of working through those feelings and emotions.
Awesome. That gives me a whole nother idea for a series where we just talk about the hot button word of sustainability and how our art
Yes.
forms can be more sustainable.
Mhm.
So I think one of the groups that I feel like I admire the most for that is the burlesque community, especially those who do a lot of like do-it-yourself costuming, because
Yeah.
I was so grateful that today I could just wear this branded shirt as opposed to having to decide what my outfit was. And it's probably my least favorite part of performing circus is figuring out what to wear.
What you're gonna
But I am so impressed when people are just resourceful with either visual art or also with their costuming, like in creating these beautiful pieces out of reused materials.
Yeah.
So whole
That
nother
is a
topic
lot
for
of
another
what
Zoom.
burlesque is just adding a bunch of glue and sequins to a new thing.
There's nothing that glue
um
can't fix. Yeah.
yeah, and like trying to figure out, like when I would buy pieces and stuff, I'd be like, okay, what else can I use this for? Like, I don't want to buy this piece if I'm not gonna be able to like utilize it for something else. Unless it was just like, oh, the piece is just too good and I just have to have it, but it really was the type of thing that I was just like, okay, like how can I, is this something that is going to be able to be like used for like even like my Halloween costume or like my, like some other thing, rather than just like a one time gag type of deal. And yeah, like finding different ways to like reuse things, or like yeah, just trying to find different ways, like either finding more like basic things that can be like dressed up, or like, yes, going for something that is bigger, but then being able to like utilize it in different ways type of deal. Like I bought this like bustle thing once that like also works as like a cape, like things like that, to where like what more, like what other things that I can do, like. And I also got this like vampire cape that I used for um an evil queen routine, because like the high collar and the cape, and then I was able to like, and then I got like fake blood on it, and then it was like, well, now it's a vampire cape. Like this is what it is. And like digging through the costume trunk, to be like, what can we use with like this, what we have, type of deal. Yeah.
If anyone was wondering the Circus District official stance on capes, we are very, very much pro cape.
Okay.
And actually, when I was talking to Maki Roll earlier, she was talking about how one of her first performances was as a zombie cheerleader. So that sounds sort of adjacent to what you're talking about.
That's hilarious,
Yeah.
because my first routine was the first burlesque routine that I did was to Kesha's Cannibal. And I was like a cave woman that was going to eat the bottom that I had because it was for my like kinky burlesque troupe. So I like tied him up and like beat him with bones and like drank the fake blood and stuff. So yeah.
That's amazing. That leads actually very nicely into my wrap-up question that I've been asking everybody, because it's something that's very close to my heart as somebody who used to work as a chef. What is one of your favorite meals to eat or also to cook?
Oh, oh my goodness.
I know it's a big question. There's a lot of
That's a
great
big
answers.
question. I am a big like meat person, so like I love a good like lamb chop or like like ribs type of deal. As far as cooking, I think the thing that always means the most to me when I cook is so my grandmother was from Spain, but her family then moved to Arizona, and then she married my grandfather, whose birthday was Christmas Eve. So for Christmas every year, we would celebrate on Christmas Eve, which is when Hispanic people normally celebrate Christmas anyway. And I always make the enchiladas. So making my enchiladas is always like that's a fun extra thing, and they're like a really like it's kind of a process. So I normally only make them a couple times a year, just because of the like time commitment and like the messiness of like having to clean up afterwards. So that would kind of that would definitely be my favorite thing. But as far as like stuff that I like to eat, definitely like meat or good curry. Like I love coconut curry, and sushi. But like just give me the slab of sashimi and like I will be happy with that.
I'm just hoping that by the end of most of these interviews, people are starting to get hungry and then they're like, oh, we got to eat something. But then all of the themes continue. So they talk things over while they eat. So they digest the issues and they also digest those messy things that we get ourselves into.
Talk about it with somebody.
Absolutely. So that's the assignment at the end of this. Great. So if there's anything else you want to add, feel free.
No, I really appreciate you like having me on. I was honestly kind of amazed that you like knew about all of this stuff that I've done because we hadn't like talked about it.
I feel like Instagram and Facebook are a powerful thing these days, but
they are. I do a lot of things. I'm definitely you had talked about like art being a big part of everything, and like that's just a part of who I am. Like I am a visual and performing artist, and like that's who I am to my core. And I only have been doing this full time for a couple of years now at this point. Like I said, I was working at that school, and the school year ended and I was like, this is it. This is what I'm doing with my life now. And it's been really rough, especially with COVID, times, not having, performances and things like, some, but like online and not making as much money and things like that. But like, it's still, it's still who I am. It's still a part of everything that is about me. And I think it's important as a super queer, to really continue to do that and be like, not only am I an artist, but I am a trans artist, I am a queer artist, and I'm here, and like this is what I have to contribute to the whatever. But yeah, also making room for people who are even more marginalized than I am. So yeah.
Great. And as people who are watching and listening, we are definitely living for that in this point in time. We definitely need more of that art. So keep creating art, keep making the world beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.